Ready when you are.
Okay. Greetings all. My name's Douglas Hemphill. I'm one of the campus instructional designers, and in today's session, we'll be looking at ways to clean up your gradebook. Uh, Anybody that's used Brightspace for a period of time may notice that things just seem to build up in the gradebook, and you're not quite sure where they come from. They're not sure, you're not sure what they're still doing there, or just in general, you want to streamline things and clear things out. Now, this course session is a little bit of an experiment because usually what we've done in the past is done this one-on-one because everybody's grade book is different. But over that time, we've noticed that there are some patterns, and so we're going to go through those patterns and talk about how to fix the underlying errors, and hopefully you'll get something useful out of it. With me today is Carrie Mocyk. She's my instructional design colleague, and hopefully she'll fill in any blanks that I miss. So to start with, if at all possible, it really is best to avoid working on live grade books. You really want to try to have your grade books in order before the course starts and before you put any grades in them. If you have to work in a live grade book, I'm going to recommend that you still follow up with an instructional designer. That way we can make sure that no grades get lost, nothing gets super broken, and it's just going to make your life easier. Having said that, the first thing that we do anytime we're working with a grade book is back it up. And it's really easy. All we do is go into our grade book. So this is a practice course that I have. And I just go into grades and go in, and you see on the main page that has my user list and all of that good stuff, I can just export that. It doesn't really matter how you export it, because we'll still be able to get it back in. But what'll happen is you'll export it to whatever format you want. It usually doesn't take very long, and then it gives you the option to download it. And it's a standard download, so once you hit download, it just saves it to your download file.
So Doug, sorry,
Yeah.
it's Dan. It doesn't matter when you hit export, just what comes up default, you can just keep that. It doesn't
Yep.
matter for you guys. Okay.
Yeah, because it's whatever gets put out is reverse compatible because it came out of the system. Usually we use that more if we're working in a live system, but it never hurts to have sort of something to go back to if you hit the wrong button and you realize you just deleted half your grade book. That said, if you want to do the restore, I would follow up with us. Um, One thing that we found when people do their own restores is it's a good way to get a lot of empty orphaned file columns in there. Now, one other thing I did want to touch on really quickly is just the idea of a percentage versus a points grade book. What we'll really be looking at today is a percentage-based grade book, simply because they're more complicated. In a points-based grade book, it's really easy to adjust the points and fix it on the fly. Again, I wouldn't do it in a live course because when you start playing with point values, it changes how things are calculated and you have to go to the backup and pull the original percentages from the backup, and it's just you gotta play with it. Um, and that again goes to the working in a live grade book. But I just wanted to point out that this session really is for percentage-based grade books where you have buckets that all your discussions go into one bucket and it's worth 20% of the grade, and otherwise the points don't matter. Versus a points-based grade book. That said, if you are using a points-based grade book, some of the stuff in terms of clearing out empty sections and stuff like that will still be useful. I hope. So now, really, before you start working on a grade book, you want to have an idea of what your grade book looks like. And this is an example of a simple learning activities and evaluation section that we would use to in that we would put into a syllabus. And all it's really telling you is here are the assignments. Here's how many of each of the assignments are. Here's the points. And then the part that really matters is the percentage of the final grade. And for a percentage-based grade book, this percentage of the final grade should always equal 100%. And if you aren't using a percent-based grade book, you're using a points-based grade book, you just ignore the last column. So now I actually want to dive into a real grade book. I screwed this thing up in every way I could possibly think of. Uh, so hopefully I can remember all the fixes that have to be done to it. But you'll see the very first thing when I come into this grade book is that I have various warnings. And we will go through each of these warnings one at a time to make sure that we fix them. But where I wanted to start is actually the idea of your naming conventions in your grade book. So I'm going to manage grade, which actually shows me every assignment in the course. And you can see, well, maybe we can see that I have some assignment names that just don't make a lot of sense. You can look at my participation, and that's really well done. I've got, discussion one, discussion three, four, five, six, and it's really easy for me to tell that I've got those discussions. And it's also really easy for me to tell that I'm missing a discussion because I don't have discussion two. And we'll go back to fixing that later. But you compare that to what I did under assignments, and you see I've got things that don't really tell me what they are. Example assignments, copy of assignments. It's better if I do something where at least I know where in the course to look for something. So module 4 example assignment, module 6 sample assignment. But really your best practice is going to be something where you have a naming convention that tells you here's where it is and here's what it is, both for your memory and for the student's memory. Now, let's see, where do I want to start fixing this? Okay, so let me just check one thing. So the most common thing that's probably going to cause your grade book to not add up properly and just generally look ugly is the idea of orphaned or extra assignments. And these come from doing copies of courses over multiple years. Uh, Sometimes they come because you think, oh, I'm going to save this for later, and it never gets used. But what you end up with is a bunch of assignments that are just taking up space. And you can generally tell these really easily by looking at the association and looking for dashes. So what a dash means is that that assignment is not connected to anything in the gradebook. Uh, in an online course, you really shouldn't see these because everything's being done online, so everything should be able to be associated. In a face-to-face course, these can serve some purpose. They're what's called a manual grade column. But for my purposes, I have a whole bunch of stuff here that's just not serving any purpose. It's from when I had a different module structure for my discussions, and I just want to get rid of all of it. And this is the first spot where things get a little weird because it's backwards from everything else. Instead of making a selection and then telling it what you want to do with that selection, you start by going to more actions, delete, and now it will let you delete things. But you will see that things that don't have an association, or sorry, that have an association, I cannot check. So it does have a little built-in control there. And so I can delete those.
Excuse me. Are you saying that you can't delete things that don't have an association then?
Other way around, if it's associated, you can't delete it. So like if I've got the example one midterm here, that's associated as a quiz, so I cannot delete that. At least not yet. And that's
When
actually
you
going to be
say
the
associated to quizzes, do you mean quizzes within Brightspace or quizzes through a third-party learning management system like MyLabs, when WebAssign, Cengage?
this is internal stuff. Um, Carrie, I'm not sure. Can you directly delete stuff from Cengage, or do you have to go through Cengage and run the grade sync?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I can look while we're in here.
Okay, we'll get back to you on that one. In this case, that would fall under an external learning tool, and I believe it actually depends on what external learning tool it is. Um, but at least for Cengage, Carrie will check on that. Now, for internal stuff, what I have to do is disconnect it from the gradebook first. So I've got a couple of examples here. So the first one is, okay, I have an example discussion that does not belong there. So what I have to do is go to my discussions. My down arrow just does not like today. And find where that example discussion is hiding. Yeah, here. So, and there's a couple different things I can do, but in most cases, I'll just delete it. And now when I go back, I'll see that 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 no longer has an association, so now I can delete it here. Except, as I said, the only way to delete something is to go to More Actions, Delete, and then it will let me delete it. Now, as long as we're talking about discussions, the flip side of this, though, is I notice I'm missing a discussion. And this is one of the more common things where I'll see, hey, this doesn't add up quite correctly. And what I do is go take a look at that discussion. So in this case, it's discussion 2, and I notice that it is not graded. So if I look at discussion 1, I've got this little notification that says this includes the assessment. So all I did was forget to actually attach this to the grade book. And that's as easy as going edit topic, telling it how many points I want it graded out of, which I remember from my other thing. And then it's in the grade book. Now, the downside is it's just going to add it to the general grade book. So I have a second step I have to take. You'll see currently it's sitting at the very bottom. Or it should be. There it is. I just had to refresh the screen. And it's not under anything, so it's not in a category, which means that it's adding 10% to the final grade without going through anything else. So what I'm going to do is just edit it. And now I can drop it right into participation. Now, unfortunately, that still doesn't quite solve things because you see, well, it dropped it at the bottom of participation. So the final thing that I have to do is More Actions, Reorder. And then I can go find that discussion and change it to number 2. So that is fixed. Now, the next thing that it's telling me is that my final calculated grade is adding up to 95%, not 100%. And I can look down here and see, okay, I'm obviously missing some points because things are not adding up the way that they should. And if I look, I can see 2 issues. I've got 2 assignments here that aren't really supposed to be here. Now, this one, let's pretend I didn't have dash midterm in there. I put that in a reference for me. And I had just written it as example 1, so I have no idea what that is. What I can do is edit it, and it will tell me what it is pointing towards. So I know that's drawing a line towards midterm, which makes it really easy for me to put it where it belongs. And I'll get, sorry. The other issue now that's spawned is it's telling me, well, midterm sums to 10%, not 100%. And what it is telling me is that this number is not making up 100% of this score. And this is where it gets kind of weird, because what it wants to happen is it wants each of these items to altogether add up to 100% of the 40% or of the 15% or whatever. And the reason it wants to do this is so that things like this, I can make it so that one item is worth more than other items. But if I don't set it up correctly, it just throws an error. 90% of the time, you're going to want to distribute weight by points. So that means the points that you use actually matter. So if something's worth 10 points and something else is worth 20 points within that category, the 20% one is going to be worth double the 10% one. However, I do have the option of simply saying, ignore the points completely. I want everything to be even, regardless of the number of points. And the advantage to doing it this way is this turns on the ability to drop grades, because now everything is normalized. So I can say, okay, and I want to drop my two lowest grades, or I want to drop my lowest grade and my highest grade. The only warning that I will give you on this is I would not turn this on until you've got at least more than one grade that you're dropping. So if you're dropping one grade, wait until they've got two grades. Because if there's one grade and it's dropping the lowest grade, it's going to drop the lowest grade, and it confuses the living heck out of students. Oftentimes it confuses the living heck out of me. So now, for some reason, I still don't have a things adding up to 100. But if I look through my grade book, these items that are kind of highlighted in a lighter blue, those are my categories. And if I look at my categories, I am missing a final exam category. Instead, what I have is just a final exam item, which I've only got set to add up to 10 points. Now, again, I've got a couple different options to fix this, but I like being consistent in what I do. So I'm going to go new category. And I'm going to make the weight of the category 25. And it really, since I only have one item in here, it doesn't matter which of these options I check, as long as I'm not using the first one. Otherwise, that'll generate an error again. And I can go ahead and save and close those. And now I can take my final exam, and I'm going to do it a little different this time. Let's pretend I have more than just one thing to put in here. So I'm going to put a check mark next to the final exam and bulk edit it. And now you see I have a pull down that I can drop that into my final exam. And you can imagine if I had multiple items, I could go down really quickly and drop them all into the category that I needed them in. So I save that, and you notice that all of my errors are gone. But there's still one thing. There's two things that are a little bit odd here. One is that I have an extra assignment here. If I go look, I've conveniently labeled it extra assignment, but you can see I've got an assignment here and it's not matching the other points. So first, let's pretend, oh, I meant that to match all the other points. So it's really easy for me to edit. And on the fly, change the maximum number of points. Now, again, this is one of those areas where we try to fix things before we put in grades, because as it notes, changing the maximum number of points can change the percentage value for the student. So this, again, if you find there's a mistake in a column and you need to change it with grades in there, that's when I would pull in an ID. So that's how I change the points on the fly, but I actually don't want that extra assignment there at all. And this works basically the same way as the discussions, except this time I'm going to go to assignments. I'm going to find that extra assignment and I'm just going to delete it. Oh, actually, I'm like, no, this time I'm actually going to disconnect it from the gradebook. So let's pretend I want to keep it for whatever reason, but I don't want it in my gradebook anymore. So I just edit it and I tell it I want to reset it to ungraded. And then I usually don't want my ungraded stuff showing up to the rest of my class. So what I will do is find that. Is my extra assignment? Oh, it's not happy because I didn't refresh it. And you'll see that the extra assignment is no longer associated to the gradebook, and I can just hide the entry from users so I can use it later. Now, if I do that, I actually like sort of grouping things together. So what I'm going to do is create a new category, call it unused. And give it a weight of 0. So it does not affect the gradebook at all. And now I'm going to use that bulk edit option again. And grab the assignments I actually made specifically for this. And dump them all into unused. And then last but not least, I go find that unused category and I just hide it from my students. Now, generally speaking, my preference is to have a cleaner grade book, so I don't usually use those unused ones, but if you're rotating an assignment like every semester, maybe you just want to keep that assignment in backup, and then you can rotate it out of the unused category when you use it and rotate it back into the unused category when you don't use it. So it's a relatively easy way to keep a couple assignments in the background that you can continually rotate. So are there questions at this point? I know that the grade book is by far the most complicated of the various use cases for Brightspace. So, and as I noted, this was kind of an experiment to see whether or not we could do a generic troubleshooting course. So I'd be curious if there are any questions, and I see Mike's got his hand up.
I noticed when you adjusted the assignment to go from graded to ungraded, the weight in the exam and the assignments folder that it belonged to did not update to a lower weight. Is the only way to get that weight out of there is to move the assignment out of the folder?
Yes, because the assignment is treated separately from the folder. So what I would have to do, it is possible to do it within the folder. If I bulk edit this, you notice I have max points and then I have weight. So if I turn the max, because of how I've got this one set up, I think I can just do this. No, it's not going to let me do that. Okay, this has to do with how I have this set up. So what I have to do is change this to distribute by points. Come on. Hmm. I don't know, I may not be able to do that without doing. I can set it to 0.01, which does effectively the same thing.
What are you trying to do?
Uh,
I'm sorry.
what he'd like to do is set it the weight of an item in a category to 0 without having to move it to a category that is equal to 0.
Gotcha.
And I
Scroll
have
down just a
one
little
more.
bit.
There's one more thing I can try. Okay, so yeah, that worked. It's just gonna yell at you because I had to do a manual override. Um, except I don't see that it did what I wanted it to do. Oh, I know what
Or
I did. I did the participation by accident. Okay, so yeah, I can do it, but it'll throw out an error. Um, the error will not stop it from working. Um, and if I went through and actually figured out what the manual numbers were such that this added up to 100, it would get rid of the error. Because what I had to do was set it to a manual to set. I told it basically let me set the weights manually, which is the first option. So you can see, even though it's worth 10 points, it's got a weight of 0.
So would you recommend that we just manually change the weight on each of those discussions that do have weight on them?
Well, is this a case where you have assignments that you want different weights on, or you want some assignments to be weighted and others that aren't weighted, or you just want some assignments not to be used in a semester?
If what the weight, if the discussions needed to have different weights on them, it would have to be manual, correct?
Yeah, but as long as it's not a 0 weight, you can do it with the points and just let the points handle it. So that way, all you have to think about is, well, do I want this discussion to be worth 1.5 times this discussion? Do I want it to be worth 2 times this discussion? It's only when you're dealing with zeros that it freaks out. So, for example, this is going to get really mad at me in a sec. So if I distribute the weights by points, I can go through and set whatever point I want. I'm seeing a screen that doesn't look quite right, so it may be doing something strange. Okay, no, it did it. So see how it automatically recalculated the weights based on the max points? And the points don't have to equal anything in particular, they just have to be in reference to each other.
And they could be
Okay.
0.
But you could certainly set it manually if you wanted to. I just find this a little easier.
Another question, when you set the max points to a lower value, it said warning, some students have a score higher than the new cap. Their grade will be readjusted to cap out at the new cap. If you then change it back to have a higher cap, will it update accordingly or will it stay at the lower cap?
Stays at the lower cap. That's why, like I said, when you're working with a live grade book, I'd work with an ID because uh will help you get that all sorted. Yeah, it does not change. It does not like it when you start changing point values on the fly. So ideally what this workshop did is give you some ideas for cleaning up a grade book before a semester starts. But like I said, anytime you're working with a live grade book, I'd still take the time to go through an ID. Unless you're really comfortable, in which case just make sure you do the backup. I've been doing this for more years than I wish to remember, and I still back it up every time. Carrie, were you able to find anything about those external learning tools?
No, because everything was asking me to log into, like I was trying to link it in and I could not do so. So I don't have an answer for it. I'm sorry. It's just not something we typically get involved in. I tried to replicate it and I wasn't able to.
I think that might have
One
been
thing
the
that's
question
kind
I
of,
had, Carrie.
no, go
Okay.
ahead,
Oh,
sorry. No, you
Um,
first, Daniel.
okay. Yeah, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I use LinkedIn Learning videos in my Brightspace course. So I use the, what's it called, the LTI, external learning tool, whatever it is. I use that to post my videos, right? And then I create like a discussion forum or something as my assessment for them watching, for the students watching the videos. So I have an assessment related to the videos that's in my discussion forum. But for some reason, when I use that external learning tool, it creates a grade column in my grade book, and it puts it as like 100 points. And so I have a whole bunch of extra columns in my grade book every time I use this external learning tool. Is that normal, or am I doing something wrong?
Um, so the thing that comes to mind is whether or not you're able to, I guess, unlink it before it comes over with the 100 points. Like, because LinkedIn Learning is generating a column that's going to be worth 100 points. So if there's a way to go back to LinkedIn Learning to set that to not graded, like it might be something, I don't know if that helps because I've never used that side of LinkedIn Learning. Typically,
Okay.
when I was working with publishers before, um, you would create the course and then it would link into Brightspace. So all the changes would take place in the the publisher course, and then that information would flow into your Brightspace course.
I
So
think
I
I'm
would
doing
go
it the other way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
there's
would go to the
I'm
source and see if that would help.
there's a couple ways of doing it. One is you could either try to change it at the source. If you want to use your own grading criteria, which is different than what's provided by LinkedIn Learning or any other external learning tool, you could always hide those grades, put them in a category and then hide those grades so then they don't show to students. You
That's what
can,
I end up doing, John. I'm
yeah,
just trying to make it a little easier for me too. It's like I have all these columns and trying to make sure I don't miss one, and you know, inevitably it's not easy. I make an error, then students are all confused, and I think it's just I must be doing something wrong for it to just make a grade column every time I try to link a video.
Um,
I
yeah,
think
it'd
I
be
might have to come
interesting.
see you guys.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you can join into the office hours or put a help desk ticket in, be happy to go through and figure out, you know, would have better
Okay.
ability to see things if you're sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
but
gonna
that's what I have been
say,
doing, John. I just hide everything from them, and basically they're okay with it. But again, it's kind of cluttered for me.
yeah. There might be an easier
Better.
way to organize it, but I would put in a help desk ticket only because I'm not seeing anything obvious in the spot where I would look to say,
Right.
I'm looking for something that would say make this graded or make this ungraded.
Right. It seems to just default to come in as a item in my grade book when I use that tool. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to stop in by office hours, I'm more than happy to take a look at it from your end, but I have a feeling I'm not going to have an answer.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mike, we'll keep looking into that other issue and we'll get back to you on it.
Thank you.
Ben has a question.
Okay. Sorry. What was
Yeah,
that?
I'm trying to dog this question. I just saw the screen you shared. Is it fair to state that if we don't find a note on the grade sheet page, that the grade sheet is good enough? Because whenever you have an issue, they'll write a note or something you need to take care of. So if we don't find it, do we assume that everything else it should be?
Uh, well, I gave a couple examples where it wouldn't necessarily flag it. What you really want to do is after you make sure that you don't have any errors is just do a final check of your assignments versus your learning activities and evaluation. And just kind of make sure, okay, I'm supposed to have 6th grade assignments. I have 6th grade assignments. I'm supposed to have one midterm. I'm supposed to have one final exam. And just sort of spot check it on that. That's the only extra step I would take.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'd definitely like to take a look at the managed grades. Like that's, the best place a good place to identify errors. So just keep track of that page, make sure that what he just said, but also in the managed grades to
Yeah, I
if there's
should have
anything
specified
extra.
that.
Yeah, you're fine. But yeah, if there's anything extra.
Use this as your comparison to managed grades is going to be your easiest shot, just to make sure that there's nothing extra hanging around that there shouldn't be.
Thank you.
So the individual folders or groups of assignments have that option to drop the lowest score among a group or drop the highest score among a group. Is there an option to just keep the highest score among a group?
It would have to be just done based on the number of the assignments. So you'd have to know, okay, there's 5 assignments, which means we're going to drop the lowest 4. But there's not an option to just use the highest assignment, at least if I understand what you're asking. Or are you asking about multiple submissions to one grade, to one assignment?
No, I mean different assignments within a group, like 5 different discussions, but I only want to keep the highest of those 5 discussions. So you're saying I have to wait till all 5 discussions are done and then adjust it so we drop the 4 lowest, correct?
Yeah, at the end of the semester, you drop the 4 lowest. I mean, it's not like even if you're dropping the lowest grade, it's not like they don't have the ability to go look at what it was. It's just their actual grade is going to show a dash for that. It's not going to show any grade for that.
And if you wanted to update, you could manually go in after you have 2 and drop the lowest 1. When you have 3, you could drop the lowest 2. It's a bit more work on your part, but at least it would be dropping all except for the highest grade.
Anything else? Anyone have any other questions about it?
Okay, well, again, I hope this was helpful. It gives you a little bit of insight into what we do when we troubleshoot these, and it is kind of a scattershot approach because is it this that's broken? Nope. Okay, on to the next thing and see if that's broken. But as always, we are available at help@oswego.edu, and we have our online office hours Monday and Thursday from 1 to 3 o'clock. And those can be found at oswego.edu/DLE. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. And have a good rest of the day.
Yeah.
Thank you.